When something's wrong with your stomach, you go to the doctor. When something's wrong with your mind, you don't? Today we're gonna tackle something that affects people regardless of their race, gender, class, religion, or sexual orientation. That thing is mental health stigma, which often prevents people from getting the help that they need.
Studies show that racial and ethnic minorities are significantly less likely to receive mental health treatment than whites.
Look, over 40 million Americans suffer from mental health conditions every year. Considering that about 1 in 5 Americans deal with mental health issues, let's look at some of the stigmas that need to go.
Stigma is a big deal in the US, but especially in communities of color.
The Asian American community has high amounts of depression, anxiety, and other mental illnesses just like every other community. Even when people might get connected to a healthcare provider, often the family doesn't understand. They feel like if it's known that their child is seeking help, that the family will be looked down upon.
Part of that immigrant experience is maybe not talking about it.
That's very much how I feel the Asian culture has also learned to cope.
Mainly, I am hoping to address our cultural stigma in relationship to mental health. But you know, when you're growing up in such a stressful environment where it's all about making sure I'm the best child and getting those straight A's, and yes, I did grow up in that type of home, I felt like I couldn't even share even remotely my interests or what how I was feeling. Like, and now my kids come home and they say things like I'm stressed out. That to me is what I want to promote more. However, there's a lot of kids, adults out there that relate to my upbringing and they struggle now with even talking about their emotions, right?
Cultural value or cultural circle does not afford you the possibility of asking for help. Not being able to even verbalize that piece then leads people to very dark corners and very dark places. Depression, untreated depression in those cases oftentimes leads to suicidal ideation or drinking or substance use of some sort.
Getting into the session, I was nervous, I was scared because I'm like, now I gotta be vulnerable. I'm not used to being vulnerable, and also I grew up with the idea that being vulnerable is weakness.
I didn't want my mom to worry about me and make them feel guilty for some of the decisions and sacrifices they had to make on behalf of the family.
I was just like, I can't do this essentially alone. Like, I need someone who I know is kind of gonna get me back on my feet.
Traditionally, African Americans will not come in and say, I'm depressed. They'll say, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Fatigue is a real clear sign. So they'll not really even appreciate themselves, that what they're experiencing. That's considered frailty. And frailty is something that's not really considered acceptable in a community that consists of mostly working people.
And I was just sitting at home, just not really doing anything. I started really getting sad, having bad days, being upset with her. And I think that's when I started to realize, like, something isn't right. I'm too sad too much.
If I die right now, it might not be such a bad thing. Like, who's going to care? If I die right now at this moment, so be it. I mean, that's the way I felt. And it took a while for me to dig up out of that.
Messages about strength and how we as Black women should show up in the world really become a core part of our essence. We keep our head held up high to be able to be resilient in difficult situations, to have grit and be able to accomplish in even the most challenging situations. When we don't address these cycles of trauma by talking about them, by attending to the feelings that can come up, we create more space for the cycle to be repeated.
People are starting to experience a level of trauma that is very familiar to many who have served in the military. Having to face an invisible enemy, having to be hypervigilant all the time.
To be able to communicate these things and talk about these things and kind of recognize where that may have started was really powerful.
It made me realize that I'm not as lost or as kind of destined for failure as I thought I was.
Show Wong Fu of the Cuckoo's Nest is this concept of fiction fiction that we're fed as Asian women about what our lives are supposed to look like.
And that's where we need to work on dismantling those myths.
Like the last 2 years or so, it just seems like it's now the in thing to talk about mental health. People, you know, they like to say like, oh, my therapist said. Every time you say that, you're normalizing that experience for someone else. So many people think that therapy and mental health is for people who are sick. That mental health and therapy is for everyone.
Many of you know me as Dr. Joy, the mental health specialist who shares information and tips to support you on your emotional wellness journey. But what you may not know is that I've been in therapy myself for over 10 years. And for a long time, I told myself that therapy was reserved for people with real problems, things that were far worse than anything I've ever experienced or faced in my own life. However, I quickly learned on my journey that we can all benefit from feeling seen, heard, and understood. So when I share this information and these tips with you, I do so not only as a clinician, but also as a client who thoroughly understands the value and importance of doing this work. The Caring for Caregivers program was designed specifically with you, healthcare workers, in mind. We understand that you are often faced with great challenges and grand responsibilities and expected to navigate these challenges and responsibilities with very few resources and very little support. So as we continue to expand our resource library with videos, podcasts, worksheets, live sessions, and trainings, we hope that you'll not only utilize this material for yourself, but that you'll spread the word and share it with your peers, colleagues, members, and staff, so that we may all walk boldly out of the shadows of shame and stigma and instead feel empowered, equipped, informed, and encouraged to prioritize and optimize our mental and emotional well-being.